Hi, thanks for joining us this morning. I'm Grant from Blackmagic Design, and today we've got some new products to show you that we wanted to give you an update on. So I'll get straight into it. So these products are a little different to products we've designed in the past because there's some changes happening in the TV industry. In some ways, with YouTube Live, we're kind of entering a new world of web broadcasting. And that that's quite a big change. So the products we've been developing are to somewhat take care of that sort of emerging part of the industry. Obviously, we continue to work on reducing the size and the cost of the products, also while improving the design. So these products are really good for AV, traditional broadcasting, and developing markets. Particularly developing markets is important. We released a whole lot of Ultra HD products, and they're all amazing. I mean, 6G SDI, 12G SDI products, but in some ways that's kind of moved away from developing markets, and so some of the products we're going to be talking about today are much better and more suited for the developing markets. But it's web broadcasting, I think, is the biggest change in the broadcast industry since color television, because with a YouTube Live channel, you can actually open up a permanent global broadcast channel. Basically, it's global and it goes to all kinds of devices. Televisions, computers, tablets, but anyone can do it. So I think that's a huge thing, and I think it's going to be a major part of the TV industry. It's not going to replace broadcast, of course. The broadcast and all these other areas have got their space, but it is a major new part, and I think it's very exciting. It's a lot of creative energy in that area. These people don't see themselves as bloggers or video bloggers anymore. I think that's almost an obsolete term. What we're talking about is a new era in web broadcasting. It's a serious part of the TV industry, and those people that are working in that field, in that area, don't want junk products. They want really good quality, high-end broadcast products, but I feel like the feature sets need to be a little bit different. So that's what you'll see what we're introducing today. You'll see that very much the products are great for broadcast, and they're great for AV and areas like that, but you can see we've really also focused on this new area of web broadcasting. So the first product I'd love to talk about today is a new HyperDeck Studio Mini. Now this is a new miniaturized broadcast deck. What we were really trying to do when we designed this product was we wanted to dramatically reduce the size of the deck. A deck from us is 1 rack unit. We were looking to make something much smaller. But we also wanted to make it a more flexible design. We wanted all the features of the bigger models, but basically miniaturized. It's a Teranex Mini size, so it lets us do a bunch of things with it. Like we can desktop mount it, like you can see here, or we can hide it behind a monitor, or we can rack mount it. We can fit 3 of those in a rack unit. So it's really good for digital signage or for ISO recorders, for recording all the cameras coming in to a live production switcher, because you can fit 3 of them in 1 rack unit. And now it records and plays in SD, HD, and Ultra HD up to 2160p 30, because it's 6G SDI. And also it supports remote Ethernet control like all the other HyperDecks do, but we can also file upload on this one using FTP protocol. Now if you look at the front panel, you can see that it's got SD cards. So we've used SD cards because they're much smaller, and that smaller media really in some ways is the key to the smaller size. It's got 2 SD card slots, so what that means is you can do non-stop recording by changing the cards. So when one card fills up, you can just change it out. Now the SD cards that it uses are great for SD and HD recording, but if you're doing Ultra HD, then you really want to use UHS-II cards. It supports ProRes YUV 10-bit files. It works with exFAT or HFS Plus file systems. Now you'd use exFAT if you're doing Windows and Mac, and HFS Plus is the Mac OS file system. It's got familiar deck style controls on the front. It's got an LCD for video preview and audio. It's got audio meters on the front. The LCD also, of course, shows time code, which input you selected, the video standard, and the media status. And there's a jog knob on the front as well. And if you push the jog button twice, it'll change between shuttle and jog mode. Now I can show you quickly how to record, and I've got a video input plugged into it, and I've got it powered up. So all you pretty much do is just reach over and hit record, and now you can see the SD card's recording and the time code's counting, and that's pretty much all there is to it. It works exactly the same as the other HyperDecks we've got. So I'll stop, and that's all there is to it. And then you can take out the media card and use it in any computer. So I think that's really exciting. So if we look at the rear panel, which is worth looking at, this is where you can start to see some of the extra features that it's got. It's got a built-in power supply, of course, and it's got Ethernet for control. Now it's a text-based protocol, so it's the same protocol as the other HyperDecks use, but it's FTP for the file upload. And the reason that's good is because it lets you use just an FTP client, but it's also a reliable protocol, so you can design a custom solutions. It's got USB on the back for software updates. It's got a reference input and a reference output. Now it's got a sync generator built in, and I'll explain a bit about what that means in a moment. But if you plug the reference in, then it'll lock the internal sync generator, and that internal sync generator will output a sync. If you don't have the input plugged in, it'll still output sync. So what that means you can do is you can plug one unit into another unit, and you can lock them both together. So you can do really large digital signs. So you could have like as many tiles as you want. You just loop the units together, and they'll all synchronize to each other. So it's a bit different to what we've done before, because generally we just had a reference input, but this reference output with the built-in sync generator lets it even output a reference when there's no reference in. So I think that's a pretty powerful feature for digital signage. So if there's no reference in, that's kind of the master unit, and all the other units are locked to it, and that output is timed to the video out, so they all play together. But you can loop one unit to another, and the other downstream units are locked to that first unit. So you can build some pretty big digital signs. I mean, it's Ultra HD playback, and you can just keep getting more tiles of Ultra HD, and you can render different media onto different cards and just output and build some really big digital signs. So that's a big part of, in some ways, what this product can do. And the HDMI output lets you plug into Ultra HD or HD televisions or projectors. So of course it's lower cost monitoring. I mean, it's you can just plug a television into it, but it's also, that's what makes in some ways it great for digital signage, because you've got those big Ultra HD tiles. Now also it can be used as a desktop player in conference rooms. Now it's got standard RS-422 deck control on the back, so you can use it in broadcast systems. And it's got, this is one of the other exciting features that it's got dual-link 6G outputs. So what that means is, and it works in HD, so this feature works in HD and SD, but if you're playing back an RGB alpha file and with an alpha channel, what it'll do is it'll output on those two connectors fill and key. So that's great when you want to use it with switches and you want to key graphics. So you can play back animations and credit rolls on this, feed it into a switcher with fill and key, and it'll end, you can do the compositing in the switcher. Now our ATEM switches support Ethernet, so they'll actually control the deck. So this is a fantastic media player if you hook it into the ATEM switcher, and you can actually run stingers and other things like that, because you can essentially use this as a media player, which is animated, and it's infinite length because you've got the media on the card. So normally, of course, when it's a dual output, when you're not using alpha channel, you get two outputs. So it's also got 6G SDI input, so it's also a great master recorder for when you're using like ATEM switches or any other switcher. So I think that's pretty exciting. You can see, if you look at the slides I've got here, you can see I've got some workflows. You can see we're using it in a broadcast situation here with a whole lot of recorders, and you can really see how many you can fit in a rack. That's working with a Teranex Mini rack shelf here. You can see we've got another scenario where we've got it being used with a in a sporting event, and here it's also basically doing ISO recording for the cameras. And then we've got another situation here where it's being used with an old Digibetacam deck, and it's a fantastic deck for using mastering. It's actually quite funny to see the size difference here. You can fit 15 of these decks in the same rack space as one digital Betacam, but it's Ultra HD, so I think that's actually pretty funny. So it's a fantastic solution for getting all the old archive content. There's so many tapes and things out there, and you just put one of these next to that deck, plug the SDI in, and just start recording off masters. You can fit a lot of masters too on these little SD cards because they're quite fast. So the HyperDeck Studio Mini we're going to be selling for $695 US. So you get basically you get Ultra HD for lower price than our HD model, the full-size one rack unit deck, which I think is a pretty good improvement we've made. Now it's available now, and it'll be in stock worldwide. So that's available now, and I think this is going to is going to give us some fantastic flexibility. So the next product I want to talk about is ATEM Television Studio. When we originally designed the ATEM Television Studio, we really wanted to build a professional switcher that was low cost, and it was great, and people really loved it. It was very popular because it was a professional switcher. It cost less than $1,000, so it was affordable, but it made a great first switcher, and it kind of grew with you. You could start with HDMI cameras and then move up to SDI cameras, so there was no glass ceiling. It grew with you. It didn't hold you down, and I think that's really important. The problem is it's time really that we do a new model. I mean, you can obviously see it doesn't have some of the industrial design that some of our newer products have. But it's time to look at this product, and it's something that we had to be careful about, because a lot of people have come up to us at trade shows and said they love the TV studio. Don't get rid of the TV studio. We love the ATEM TV studio. And so we knew we kind of had a pretty big responsibility. The customers that used the ATEM Television Studio use all the features in it. I mean, they really rely on everything it's got. I mean, a lot of the other switches we have in the bigger 12G SDI products and 6G SDI products, people can kind of, they buy various modules, but the people using the ATEM TV Studio really need every feature in it. So, we looked at it and we thought, what are the benefits that the older model had that we felt was really important to people? And obviously the 6G, the six inputs it had with HDMI and SDI connections were really important. You could, start off with HDMI cameras and move up to SDI cameras, but also each input had a frame resync, which means, you could use any source with it. You didn't have to have Genlock sources, and that's really important. Also, it had an upstream key with a chroma key, and that's also really important. It's a fantastic ability to do chroma keying in the switcher. It had 2 downstream keys for graphics. It had full transitions with SMPTE wipes. I mean, a lot of SMPTE wipes. It had a built-in media pool for 20 still frames and a Photoshop plugin, so you could download from Photoshop graphics directly into the switcher, which is great when you're doing like live sports and things like that, and you need to get the results of a race or something like that in there. And also, we added an audio mixer as a software update at one point, and it mixed audio from all these sources. It had a multi-view in it, so you had 8 different sources plus program and preview, and you could even handle 16:9 in a standard definition. All that was available. Obviously, it had camera control and a tally out via the SDI program output on the switcher. We had software control panels for macOS and Windows. So it was, it was a really powerful switcher. It gave people a lot of power. But then you look at sort of the limitations, and you start to realize that it had a couple of big limitations that our other switches didn't have. And it actually really only works with SD, 720p and 1080i broadcast formats. There was no 1080p, so it kind of limited it for web-based broadcasters, because the web-based guys don't care about interlace, and they wanted 1080p formats. Also, it only had 6 inputs total. It had 6 SDI connectors and 4 HDMI connectors, but there was only actually 6 active inputs. It had no analog audio input, so you had, using an external audio mixer was kind of hard. It had a BNC AES input, but that was really kind of a bit tougher to use. It also had no aux output, so you couldn't drive screens or projectors or even do clean feeds out for, and so that limited it a little bit. And also, we got to the point where we couldn't really grow the software anymore. We like to try and do as much software and products as we can. My general feeling is that if you've bought a product from us and we can give you new updates, and I think that that's almost like saying thank you for trusting us and buying a product from us, and that's a reward for, like, in some ways you guys, the customers, if they paid for the product, they've kind of also paid for engineering, and so if we can get new features in the product for them, then that's the best win-win sort of deal. I mean, they get new features and we get a chance to have the engineers to build those new features, but we just couldn't put anything more in the old TV Studio model. I mean, when we put the audio meters on the multi-view and all the other switches, we couldn't get them into this model anymore. So it was time we introduced a new model, but we really wanted to kind of completely rethink the model. We didn't want to, in some ways, because of the nature of this product, its needs for web broadcasting, its needs for sort of people. I mean, people do weddings with these switches. They use them in AV situations, and of course, high-end broadcast guys use them in really portable, often ENG type situations where they've got a sort of broadcasting from a location, and it's ultra portable. So we really had to think deeply about this model. We couldn't, the other switches we do, they're more modular. It's a switcher with so many inputs, and then we've got all these various devices you put together. But in the case of the TV Studio, we needed to really look at doing a new model that combines small size and all these powerful features, so you kind of get as much as possible. That's why we called it ATEM Television Studio, because it was, we were trying to get a whole TV studio in there. So the new model is called ATEM Television Studio HD, and I'll bring the slide up of it. As you can see, it looks quite different. It includes some really powerful new features, and the most obvious one obviously is the control panel. It's a Teranex Mini based design, so it's smaller than the previous model in rack units, but it's also designed to look good on a desktop. In fact, I'll bring it over. You can see the unit here. And in fact, what I'll do is I'll plug it in before we get into it, so we can make all the lights light up. So I'll plug the power in, I'll plug the SDI in. And what I'll do is I'll also plug in a second HDMI source, which I've got here, so we can see it running in both SDI and HDMI, so we can get it all lit up and all working. So you can see it there. So now you can see that the great thing about this design, being Teranex Mini based, is it looks really good on a desktop, and the previous model couldn't do that. It was a rack based unit, so you couldn't really use it on a desktop. You had to put it in a rack. But this one actually works on a desktop. Now what that means also is you've got a spare rack space free, so you can put another module in there like the HyperDeck. If you have this in a Teranex Mini rack shelf, there's one rack unit. So you can get the whole thing, the switcher and the recorder in one rack unit. So that makes it much more compact. Now, the old model was popular for small programs and small live work, but the new model, I think, because you can use it from the front panel, expands into sort of the web broadcast side and the AV market, and also I think it's much better for the developing countries, like I mentioned. Now, traditionally, you know, if you look at small switches, they were kind of small little plastic things, and they had like 2 inputs, and that was it. And in fact, what was on the front panel was really all you got. I mean, you didn't get anything else. I think what's interesting about this is it's important to know that the switcher inside the unit is so much bigger than what the front panel is. The front panel lets you use part of the switcher, and it lets you actually run the switcher, but the switcher itself is everything that the previous television studio model had and more. So it's a much bigger switcher, and you can unlock that power by using the software hardware control panels. But you can still operate the switcher from the front panel as well. So I think that gives you some really good flexibility, and it really is usable from the front panel. Now, there's lots of new features in this new model, which I'll talk about now. The first one, obviously, is the front panel. So you don't need to use a computer. You could use a computer to set it up, but then you can actually operate from the front, which really makes it quite useful when you're using like AV situations where it might be the front end for an AV system. Now, the new model handles all SD, 720p, 1080i, and 1080p 60 video 1080p 60 up to 1080p video formats up to 1080p 60. So in other words, it's doing all the 1080 progressive modes, but it goes all the way up to 60 frames a second. So you can do fast sports and other areas like that. So it's not just adding the 1080p modes, it's adding the higher frame rate 1080p modes, which I think is really important when you're doing lots of fast action. Now, it's got 8 inputs in total. So all the inputs are active. There's 4 SDI and 4 HDMI inputs, and you can get all of them, and they all have frame resync. So it's a bit better than the older model in that regard. But with the other exciting thing is some of the new features we've put in there, and we've got a DVE in it. So you can actually do picture-in-picture, and you can do DVE transitions. You can do like size and move. You know, you can do like, you know, a picture-in-picture for like commentary, things like that. It's got an aux out. So it's got a completely independent aux output, so you can drive screens and projectors. It's also got, I'll show you the, go through it. Yeah, it's also got a bounced XLR audio inputs on it. So it's much easier to get this plugged into an analog audio mixer, which I think is yeah, just a huge relief. Most people doing live production work like analog audio mixers, and it's you just plug it in now with normal XLR connectors. Now, the other big thing we've done is there's built-in talkback, and if you look at the front, you can see there's these 2 connectors on here. There's built-in talkback, so you can plug a headset. We use general aviation headsets because they're really tough. I mean, there's flight shops in pretty much every airport and online stores where you can get like really huge range of headsets, like simple ones, but also big noise-cancelling ones, and they're really strong connectors, and they're really common. So, you know, we like using them for these kinds of switches because we think they're a fantastic solution for talkback. And you can plug that right into the front panel area, and you've got all the talkback built in. So there's 4 extra program SDI outputs that you use to link back to the camera, because the way the talkback works is you connect the SDI from the switcher to the camera, and channels 15 and 16, the talkback audio from the director, who's plugged into the switcher, that goes to the camera, and the camera guy can hear you, and then the camera talks back through channels 15 and 16 on the SDI feed back down the camera path. So because it's bi-directional connection, those 4 SDI outputs of the switcher that you plug into your cameras, you've got now a bi-directional talkback, and of course the tally and the camera control goes out through there as well. So that's also really powerful. The other big thing the switcher has, it's got a 20 still frame media pool, but we've now got flash memory in it. And if you don't use the switcher with a front panel, with a computer, then you're going to really need that flash memory backup, because you might set up the switcher with a bit of software, like the software control panel. But then at that point, when you go out with it, and if you don't want to use the computer, then you need to, you don't have to load the media pool, because it's actually just remembers the media because it's got flash memory. There's also a built-in power supply now, so there's no external power brick. It's also got a better multi-view. The multi-view now has the audio meters on it, and you can route the views. The older model of TV Studio, you couldn't route the views, but on this one you can, and you've got the audio meters on all the sources. You can select them by source, and of course you've got the custom labeling. So I think that's pretty nice. Now, if we check out the front panel, and we can go into that in a little bit detail, we can see how that works. You can see that what's on the front panel is a whole row of buttons along the bottom, and that's where you do your primary switching. Now, you don't need to use a computer. You really can use it from the front panel. So what I'll do is I'll head over to the rack behind me, and I can give you a bit of a view about how that actually works, because we can do some transitions, and I can sort of explain how that front panel works. So over here, we've got the new ATEM Television Studio HD in the rack. We've got a multi-view plugged in, and you can see we've got some audio meters here. Now, To do a transition, it's actually really easy. You can see we've got the source buttons on the front here, and we've also got a media player 1 and 2 button up there, which are also additional sources. So if I wanted to go to input 5, I can select that, and it's a little bit different. What you've got, this is actually the preview row, but the program, the source that's actually on air is actually highlighted. So when I select input 5, it goes green. Well, all I need to do is select cut or auto, and I can hit auto, and I've just done a cross dissolve, or I can hit cut, and it'll cut. So there's the program view there. And you can see that just operates very much like the software switcher does. And in fact, because the software switcher is connected into this rack, you can see that when I do the transition, you'll actually see the fader bar on the software mirrors it. Because the software runs the whole switcher, but the front panel in some ways gives you a subset, but the front panel's got enough to actually use it. So you can see it's very easy to use. I can select another source, hit auto, and it's really that simple. Now, it's very similar to the same as a program preview switcher, which is basically the same as professional switches. So even on the front panel, because it's limited, we've only really got space for 1 row versus the 2 row on the program preview. It does work like a program preview switcher. Now, what I'll do is I'll change the transition type, and we'll do a DVE transition. So to do that, you hit the menu button, you can see there. Now I've got a program source, and I've currently, you can see it selected, but what I'll do is I'll scroll across to the transitions menu, there it is there, and I can select that. Then I can select to change the transition. I scroll down to DVE, there it is there, and now when I go out, I've got all my DVE transitions. So I'll just push menu to go back to the main screen. But now when I do my transition, you'll see, in fact, actually you can see it over in the software control panel over there. It's changed DVE as the transition type because I changed it. It used to be on mix, but now it's on DVE. Now when I push that, you can see it's done the DVE slide transition, and which I think is pretty fun. So that's DVE transitions, but of course you can do picture-in-picture with it as well. So it's pretty exciting. So the other thing is that it can be changed to an AB direct switcher. So you know, at the moment, if I select sources and I select them on the front there, that's a program preview style of switcher. But I can use a AB direct style, which essentially means that when you push the source, it would immediately cut to that source. So it's not going to it's not going to wait for you to push those auto or cut button. And the reason for that is that's a bit more like a sort of a cut bus style of operation, and you can change that setting in the menu. So you can actually use the switcher in both ways. You just go into the settings preference in the switcher and then you change it. So the next thing to explain while I'm over here is you can see all these buttons along the top here. Now we wanted to be able to use the switcher from the front panel, which means we need to be able to actually adjust the audio mixer in the front panel. And actually before I do that, what I might do is go across and I'll click the audio mixer page on the software. So as I'm adjusting audio on the front of the unit, you can actually see it changing on the front over here. So I'll click over here and I'll click the audio meter, the mixer, sorry, and there you can see I've got the audio mixer up. And you can see that some of the sources have audio on them. Now to adjust the audio levels, you can actually do it from the front. All you need to do is if I push, so you can see it says master on the front of the switch. So what that means, if I adjust the master, you can see that this knob is now adjusting the master level there. But if I push the button 5, it changes to camera 5. And now when I adjust the knob, it's actually now adjusting camera 5. And you can see as I adjust the knob there, I'm bringing that up and down. So you can see how I can adjust audio levels, and I can really actually use this, the whole audio mixer I can actually use from the front. Not only that, I've got a row of buttons along the front, and each one of these set of buttons here is actually for that input. So if I turn on and off, I can see myself turning on and off the channels there. I'm changing input camera 6, and I can turn on all the others. Now this would be a bit of a messy audio, you'd have to have all this audio coming in. But you can see how everything I do on the front panel is reflected in the software, and that's because the software is one control panel. The switcher, the front panel is another control panel. You could have hardware panels as well. They all work. So you can see how that kind of works. Also, one other thing that's worth noticing while we're on the audio page is there's a few extra settings for the in the audio mixer page, because this has talkback in it. One of the exciting things about having talkback in it is not actually so much the talkback, because you can actually use the microphone in the headset to do commentary. So the microphone on the headset comes in to the audio mixer over there. So you can fade up the microphone on the headset and do commentary. You know, the director could almost do commentary. And that's sort of exciting for a lot of the guys doing gaming competitions and some other kinds of small shows. But also the headset speakers can be just used for program monitoring. So even if you don't use the headset for voiceover, you can still use it for monitoring your program audio, for doing voiceovers. And there's even a side tone adjustment there. So if you're talking in the headset and you've got one of those big noise cancelling headsets, you can hear yourself, you can hear your own microphone, because you can adjust how much of that goes back in. So that's pretty exciting. So one of the other things we'll do is we'll look at some of the other buttons on the front panel, and we can play with the media players. The media players here are as sources. So if I select media player 1, it's on the preview row here. Now when I bring it across, and in fact I did a DVE transition to it, which is pretty funny, but you can see I can select both media players here, which is great when you've got title graphics. We started this presentation with a title graphic. You could have that in the switcher, so that's pretty nice. The other thing you can do is there's a downstream key 1 mix button, and what that lets you do is we've got a graphic in media player 2, and that's in downstream key 1. And often if you've got like a live logo or something like that, you might want to fade it on and off. So we can come over here and we can fade that on, and you can see you've got access to that, and it uses the transition time for the downstream key 1, but that's you can directly bring on and off air downstream key 1 through that button. So that's pretty nice. And the last button we've got on the front here is fade to black. And what that does, of course, is just fade the entire output to black. So you can see it there. So that's pretty nice. So you can really operate the switcher from the front. And the last thing it's probably worth showing you is that of course, we've got the aux out. So if you want to use the aux out, so what we'll do is we'll go back to the front and we'll transition back, we'll get another setup. So you can see we're doing a switch on the front panel here, but I want to change the aux output, and I can do that from here. All you got to do is go across here and push the aux button, and you'll see now that everything changes to white, and the aux button goes white. Now the front panel is actually changing the aux out, so you can direct cut bus transition between different auxes, and then you can just go back, and you're back to your front panel again. So that's pretty exciting. So you can really see there's it really does operate from the front panel. I mean, you can, in the menus, there's pretty much everything. So what's exciting is that whatever's not on the front panel, and even if you're not operating with the switcher, the LCD doesn't just show you the preview and the audio meters and audio adjustment. It actually lets you completely control the switcher, like all the switcher features. I can bring it up there, and in fact I'll go across to, so you can see there's a slide with some of the menus in it, and you can really, and all the palettes are all arranged in similar order to what they are in the software switcher. So there's pretty much everything there. You can see we've got transition adjustments and pretty much everything. I mean, it's all there. We've got and all the other thing you can do is you can directly select the program and preview and aux out. So if you've only got 8 buttons on the front and the media players, but there's actually more sources in the switcher. So what that means is you can go into those menus there and you can adjust and you can set those. So you could do like set color bars or something like that. So everything's in there. So I think it's pretty exciting. And of course the aux out, and there's an audio mixer menu in there, and of course there's a setting menu, so you can set things like the video standard and IP address settings. So that pretty much everything's in there. If you don't have it on the front panel, so you don't have to. You can even set the switcher up without using the software. You can do a hell of a lot on the front panel through those menus. It's a whole new menu system in the switcher. Now, if we look at the back panel, you can see that it's got a built-in power supply, and you can see the Ethernet there for Mac and Windows. You can have multiple control panels plugged in, hardware and software control panels. It's the same as other ATEM switches, so any control panels you have will still work. There's the USB on there for software updates. We've got the 4 HDMI inputs, and all of them have got resync, so that's fantastic for consumer cameras. There's a remote port. Now, this is a little different to what we've done on some of the switches. Some of our higher-end switches have a remote port, but we think people using this switcher are going to be more needing PTZ cameras. So we put the serial port on there so you can control pan tilt zoom cameras using that serial bus. And of course, because we've got the serial port on there, we can also do GVG100 external control, which is sometimes used for, I mean, people are still actually using edit controllers for certain types of work. So that kind of gives you that. We kind of get that for free in a way by having the serial port on there, because that's more of a software protocol change. So we think that serial port is pretty important on a small switcher like this. There's the 4 SDI. If you look back at the back panel, you can see there's 4 SDI inputs. Now they've all got resync, so you can work with professional cameras. And so what's interesting about these, though, you'll notice that there's 4 SDI outputs above them, and that's the outputs that we use for talkback. They're the outputs that go back to the cameras. But what's interesting about these, sending those connections back to the cameras means that the camera operator can see the program view. They also get the tally and talkback and control. And I think that's exciting to have that built in. You don't really need to have external distribution amplifiers or things like that. But what really I think makes one of the reasons that it's an exciting feature for us is that those SDI outputs can do mix minus. So what that means is you can use them for other things. Again, if you're not doing talkback, you can feed those off to an interview, and you might be connecting via computers doing Skype or something like that, where it might be people you're interviewing that might be scattered around the country. Now, what that mix minus means is that, and what it does is that all the program audio goes out of all those outputs. But if you turn on mix minus, what it does is it means you can subtract the input that's below it from the output. So if you look at the, say, output 5, if you turn on mix minus for that output 5, input 5's audio will be subtracted off it. So the program audio will be coming out of that output number 5 minus input 5's audio. So that means if you were sending that input output 5 to an interviewee, they wouldn't get delayed sort of audio of their own voice coming back to them. And that can be a really powerful feature. So looking along the back of the panel further, you can see there's an aux output, so you can drive the projectors, and that's an SDI out. Also, you can do clean feeds from that. And there's a bunch of different sources that can go to the aux out, and some of them actually don't have the downstream keyers on them, and they're called clean feeds. So that can be really nice if you're maybe using one of the downstream keyers for like a live logo or something like that, which needs to go out to the venue, but you don't really want to have that recorded on the master, so you can use a clean feed on the aux out and actually master off the aux output. Now there's a reference input. Obviously large broadcasters use the reference connection, but what it also does is that if you have gen-locked cameras and a gen-lock switch, it'll eliminate the delay of the input resyncs because you won't need them. If you've got gen-lock sources, you won't need the input resynchronizers. They'll automatically turn off, and that'll reduce the delay to a few samples. Whereas if you don't have synchronized sources, you can get up to a frame of delay because the resynchronizers need to compensate and adjust the timing of all the cameras. So reference input can be really quite powerful from that point of view. There's the multi-view output on the back panel as well, and we have both an SDI and a HDMI output for multi-view. Obviously for SDI professional monitors or just HDMI TVs, again it lowers the cost having that HDMI multi-view out. Then there's the main program out, you can see there, and it's, that's what all the layers are visible on. That's the main program output. That's the one that generally you'd feed out to your live broadcast. And then next to it are the XLR audio inputs, and they're line level, and that's what you can plug your external audio mixers into. So I think this is a really exciting feature. You can see I've got a slide up here of some of the kind of workflows that you can see. I mean, here you can see it being used as a simple switcher just on a desk with a couple of cameras plugged into it. This desktop design really lets that become very easy. You can see again we've got another workflow, which is a small TV show that's being done where somebody's doing a motorbike maintenance program, which is one of the scenarios, and they could be live streaming that, or they could be doing it as a general production. The great thing about live production is that at the end of the show it's finished. I mean, it's a really fast way of doing production, really much lower cost in many ways and much more immediate. And I think it's actually much more an adrenaline rush. It's exciting doing live production. Everybody works together as a team. And one of the other workflow situations here is a lot of radio stations now want to cover what they're doing, and they want people to be able to see the people in the radio station. And again, we've got another scenario here, which is someone doing a sporting event, and they've just got we've got the small switcher mounted there with a little rack-based flip-up monitor, and you can see the whole thing is just one small portable design. So it's pretty exciting. Now, what's really exciting about this model is it's the same price as the previous model. It's a much better switcher for the same US 995 price as what the previous model was. So I think that was a huge thing for us to be able to get the all these extra features in for the same price. Obviously it includes all the software control panel, and you can run as many copies of that as you want. There's all the features are included. We don't have any licenses to pay for any of these features. That's what I just talked about is what's actually in the product. And so the ATEM Television Studio HD is also in stock, and it's available now worldwide. And so I think that's going to be hopefully an exciting product. And I really hope that the customers are happy with the change we've made and the sort of new direction. I think we've kind of tried to capture all the stuff that they loved about the old model, add a lot of stuff that it couldn't have done before, and this, hopefully this new model is something that they're pretty pleased. We'll find out pretty quickly, I guess, how it goes. But we're pretty proud of this unit. It's better design, tons of more features, and it's the same price point. So we worked very hard to get to that point. Now, of course, the big question is streaming. The old model had H.264. This model doesn't have H.264, and the reason for that is removing the cost of that H.264 allowed us to make a much better switcher. And a lot of people weren't using the H.264 and the older switches, so we didn't feel like they had to pay for it. What we really felt like we should be doing is doing a better switcher, and then you decide that you add a streaming solution if you want it or not. Now, the old H.264 design also wasn't really flexible enough for us to do streaming. We just couldn't really do streaming the way we wanted to do with it. But it does leave open the question, what do we do about streaming? So we need a streaming solution. It's really important. So that's where I'd like to show you the new Blackmagic Web Presenter. Now, what Blackmagic Web Presenter does is it basically makes any SDI HDMI source look like a HDMI webcam, USB webcam. So I mean, it sounds, but it's more than a converter. It's quite a powerful little unit. Now our desktop products, we make products that are designed for getting video into computers. The problem is they send all the pixels. They're designed for post-production. So what we do is, we're focused on our normal desktop video products for just maximizing quality. And so many pixels come into the computer. You need Thunderbolt 3 or high-speed PCI Express. It kind of overloads the computer, and it makes streaming hard because now the streaming software has to deal with all this stuff. But a webcam doesn't work like that. Webcam drivers are built in. By looking like a webcam, it just works. And in some ways, all the streaming software is tested with that. So these webcams work with a driver called UVC drivers and then UAC drivers, and they're built into all the operating systems. They're really well tested, very common. Most computers have webcams built in. So what that means is that the streaming software is, or pretty much every bit of software is really well tested with webcams. So what that means is that we get a much more, we get a solution that works with all that software because those drivers and the webcams are so common. But we also, the big thing is we reduce the resolution of the video to match the stream. So what this means is the computer gets a very easy to handle webcam video. It allows you to use obviously slower computers, but also slower internet links. It's all over simple USB 2. It works on Mac, Windows, Linux, Chromebook, anything. Anything that works with webcams works, with the USB webcams works with this. And as I was saying, the software is really well tested with webcams because they're built in. So if you're going to be doing video software, the first thing you do is make sure that it works with a webcam. And that really ensures compatibility. The software doesn't even have to know it's a webcam. It actually has no idea. It thinks it's a webcam, so it has no idea at all. And so, in fact, we've even used a webcam chip to ensure that the product's compatible. I'll bring it up here. I've got one. Here it is here. I'll put it here. So that's Blackmagic Web Presenter. And you see it's, the great thing about it is it uses such high quality SDI and HDMI sources, not a cheap camera. So it's actually surprising how good the quality is. And in fact, I'll actually go to that in a minute because it's something else it does. Now the streaming resolution is 720p. A lot of people have asked us about this. They said, we want to use 720p, we want to convert to low frame rate 720p. The problem is just converting to it is really only solving half the problem. What we really need to be able to do is convert. If we go to USB webcam video, then that USB driver can actually tell us to back off. In some ways the computer has control over the video. So what software can actually do is tell the webcam driver, I don't want 25 frames a second, I don't want 30 or whatever frames a second. So the web presenter will actually back off the video rate. So it'll actually drop down to 25, 20, 15, 10, or even 5 frames a second if the software tells it to do that. So what that means is that you don't overload the computer with too many frames. The streaming software has more time to compress the individual frames that it does get, and it's going to hold the stream up and make the stream more reliable by doing that. And of course, 720p is a much, it's high definition, high quality, but it's, it's a much lower data rate. Now it's also got 12G SDI, so it handles all SD, HD, and Ultra HD formats up to 2160p 60. So it's got a Teranex-based down converter in it. It's got HDMI in, of course, so you can plug in HDMI cameras or computers with a graphics or a slideshow. But that Teranex down conversion means that what we do is we take whatever comes in, so you can master and high-end stuff, and it'll drop it down to 720p with Teranex quality. So you get really good quality video. So what that means is you can do your production in high resolution. Like you could do high frame rate, 60 frames a second, Ultra HD, and Blackmagic Web Presenter will actually take care of down converting that to 720p, reducing the frame rate if the software tells it to for streaming, and that makes it take care of everything. As I was saying, people asked us for low frame rate 720p solutions. We think this is the way to do it. That low data rate means you get a really good stream out of any location. I mean, you can have a really quiet or poor internet connection, you'll still get the stream out. And of course, you can use software such as Open Broadcaster, which is free software. It's open source, free software, and now you can use that for preparing the stream to get it out. But you can use Skype as well. I mean, it's a webcam. It looks like a webcam, so you can use that. In fact, you can try out this yourself. You could try Open Broadcaster just using your webcam, so you can sort of get a stream going. You should try it with YouTube Live and just a webcam and see if you can get a stream up. And if you can make that work, and it's quite simple. We've got a video on the website that'll show you how to do that. Then this just basically all you do is select Blackmagic Web Presenter in the same way. So what I'll do is, and in fact I'll go to the next shot. There's actually another version which I'll talk about in a second. You can also add the Teranex Mini Smart Panel to the front, and what that'll let you do is gives you some extra features, which I'll talk about in a second, but you can also use it as a switcher. But what I'll do first, I'll go over the rack on the back, and I'll show you how you can select the Blackmagic Web Presenter as a video source. And what I'll do is I've got Skype on that computer over on the back, so I'll just bring up the Skype preference window and you'll be able to see it work. So I'll go over to it. And over here, in fact I've got Skype, and I'll bring up the preferences. So you can see there, I've got the output of the switcher here, and if I patch through to one of the other sources, you can see that I just did a DVE transition. I've still got the DVE transition selected, which is pretty cool. But you can see it's really quite remarkable quality. And as I do all my transitions, it cuts. So I've got the quality of a professional SDI broadcast product going up into Skype, and I could make a call with that and get all that quality. It's really quite amazing. So all you need to do, and of course all you need to do in the user interface is just select Blackmagic Web Presenter as the video source, and also in Skype they've got a separate audio connection. So you also select the audio source as being Blackmagic Web Presenter, and then it just appears and it looks the same as a webcam. Now the guys who wrote Skype didn't really intend it to work with SDI, especially 12G SDI sources, but it takes care of it. It brings it in, down converts it to 720p, so the data rate's easy. It's just USB 2, so it works on all kinds of computers. Very easy to set up. You just switch it over, and there it is. In fact, we use the on the Mac there. We use the photo booth app, which does weird photos of from your webcam, and even that works. That's pretty exciting. Now I'll talk about the design a little bit. It's a Teranex Mini size, so it works on a desktop, but of course you can rack mount it. So you can rack mount it with a Teranex Mini rack shelf. So you can put in a rack, and of course it's a fantastic companion for the ATEM Television Studio solution here, as you can see. So it all fits in only one rack unit. So it's very portable, but you can also build a bit of a larger system. I mean, having a switching and streaming solution in one rack unit is very tiny, especially if you add another deck. And you can add like a couple of ISO recorders or a couple of mastering recorders or a couple of clip generators all in one. It's quite powerful. So the great thing about the Teranex Mini Smart Panel is it adds video preview, audio meters, which input is selected, the video standard, and the USB frame rate on the front panel. And that's really good to know. Like if you're doing a live stream or a broadcast, which is what we're doing now, in fact we're using it now to do this stream. Now if you're doing that, you really want to know what's going on. So having that information on the front is really important. And the USB frame rate we put on there, now normally it shows 0 in this case. In fact, what I'll do is I'll plug it in. We'll plug the unit in so you can see the video coming up. I'll plug my HDMI in, and I'll plug in the SDI. Bit of a stiff connector here, and you'll see it come up. And we'll see that we've got the front. Now, the USB frame rate shows 0. Should be running there. Got some video coming in. So that normally shows 0 because I don't actually have the USB plugged in. But as soon as the USB comes online, it'll show you the frame rate. So if the software backs off the frame rate, you can actually see what it's doing. So you can see what your input format frame rate is. But the USB frame rate, they can actually back it off. And I've done a few calls with Skype on deliberately bad internet connections and seen the frame rate go down. Now, if the internet bandwidth is low, that's why this is so important. That's the software saying, okay, I can't deal with that bandwidth. It'll drop the frame rate down. We'll reduce the frame rate, and essentially we do what we're told. We do what the computer tells us to do, and that LCD means you can kind of monitor that and see what it's actually doing. Particularly useful for Skype calls. I think it's really good to know. All that stuff, and it's good to know what the video format is. You're getting audio and video through. You can tell what the format is. I mean, that's just in general. Broadcasters know this. You need to know what's actually happening. So live production's scary. So I think getting this kind of feedback is really nice. So you know what's going on. Now, adding that Teranex Mini Smart Panel is more, gives you more than just the status information. It actually lets you use the unit as a live switcher. And I think that gets a little bit more logical when you look at the back. I'll bring that slide up at the back panel. Now it's got a HDMI input, it's also got an SDI input. So what you can do is if you add the Teranex Mini Smart Panel, the HDMI input has actually got a resync on it. So you can do clean transitions between the SDI and the HDMI source. And I can show you doing that. Like if we push button 1, I've got the Teranex Mini Smart Panel on here. If I push input 1, I get the SDI input. If I push input 2, I get the HDMI input. And you can see there's a nice transition between them. So what that means is you can actually do a live switch on the unit itself. So you could use the SDI input for a professional camera, and you could do graphics and slides on the second HDMI input. So you just push button 1 for the SDI source and button 2 for the HDMI source. It does a nice half-second dissolve, so it looks nice. So it's pretty, I think that's kind of a nice feature. And one other thing that's quite cool, and one thing we did, and it works most of the time, is it's the HDMI source that's being resynchronized. When you plug both the HDMI and SDI in, the HDMI will report back up the HDMI stream what the video standard is based on what the SDI input is. So if you're using the HDMI input from a computer, that'll generally mean the computer will hopefully set its video standard automatically for you to what the SDI is input, so that both those sources match the video standards, and then they both will then blend together properly, because you'll be able to switch them cleanly. So I think that's just little things like that we've done on the product to help make it useful. So if we focus a bit more on the rear panel, you can see it's got a built-in power supply, so there's no annoying plug packs. It's a 12G SDI input, so it's got a loop output you can see there that goes off to other gear. The USB connector is essentially, it says USB webcam, it's just USB 2. You plug it in the computer, that's what looks like the webcam, so that's the video out, is that USB connector. Now there's a program output on the back panel as well, you'll see it at the top there. What that lets you do, that's after the transition block, but before the down conversion. So if you were doing a small switch on the front of the unit, and you had you want to record that, if you were doing a presentation to someone, kind of like what we're doing here, we're recording this. So you could use that program output to record your switching on the front of the panel as a master, but then it's not, and then you get a full resolution quality while you're streaming the lower, resolution down converted 720p out. Now that program output also has got another cool feature. We've put the tally protocol on it. So what that means is that when you're switching between input 1 and 2, if you feed that into one of our studio cameras or some minis, what it'll do is it'll turn the tally light on the camera, which I think is pretty cool. So if the USB is active and the camera selected, then you'll see the tally light. Now I think that even if you're switching on the front of this, doesn't mean to say you don't not want tally. Tally is a fantastic feature. So that if you feed the program output back to the camera, it'll light the tally light up. All you need to do on the camera is set the camera 1 is SDI 1 and camera 2 is HDMI. So you set that on the camera. In the way the tally protocol works is that the camera actually has the camera number set on it. So whenever camera 1 is on air and the USB is active, then you'd see the tally light on the camera. Now tally really helps, obviously the presenter know when they're on air. So even though it's only a 2-input switcher, you've still got a presenter on air, they're still talking, and then you kind of need to know when they're on air, and that light will light up when the stream's active and also when they're on air. So I think it's really nice. But that program output, the big thing of course is recording a full resolution master without, sort of before that down converted 720p stream. So you could maybe upload a full 1080 or Ultra HD version of the video online later, but the stream is the thing that has to happen immediately. That's why it has to be 720p. So also the HDMI input also has a HDMI loop out. Going back to the back panel, you can see that. That's great if you're putting this Blackmagic web presenter in line with the video projector. Sometimes if you're doing a speech or someone's on a podium, they've got some slides. I've got slides on the laptop here. You want to really get between their computer and the projector. Normally they just plug their computer into the projector, but the web presenter now can be inserted in between it, because you can plug the computer into the HDMI in, and out of the HDMI it goes off to the projector. So we get access to that good quality slides. Meanwhile, the presenter is actually just putting his slides up into the projector for the audience. Now, if you wanted to use 2 SDI cameras as sources, you can do that. You can just use a simple SDI to HDMI converter, and that would convert the other HDMI input to an SDI input. And so you can even do a multi-camera job if you want. Now there's a built-in audio mixer. If you notice, there's a couple of audio connectors on the back panel there. There's a built-in audio mixer that blends the audio from all the inputs, and you can see there's a hi-fi audio input. So you can plug some music or computer audio into that. Some HDMI sources don't have audio on some computers, so you could use the hi-fi inputs for that. And also one other thing is, if you're streaming a channel at a specific time, sometimes you want an introductory slide that people, while they're connecting to the stream before the program starts, they can at least see something, and also you can have some audio, like music playing at the same time. So that hi-fi input can be really nice for that. Yeah, and there's an XLR input as well. That's a mono input, and that's good for like a lapel mic or a podium mic, and that mono input will go to both left and right channels in the audio mixer. So you don't have to have a wire cord or anything like that. You can just plug it straight in. So what that means, of course, is you can do a live production in this one unit. You can have cameras, graphics from a computer, music, a lapel mic or a podium mic all plugged in, and you can do this all on Blackmagic Web Presenter. And as I said, we're using Blackmagic Web Presenter for this stream. So what you're seeing is actually going through one of these units right now. So I think that's pretty exciting. And you can see, of course, that we've got a much better streaming solution. Because it's not built in the ATEM Television Studio, you can use it separately. So in combination, you still get the same solution of switching and streaming in the one rack unit, but because it's not part of the switcher, you can use it without the ATEM. So you can use it by itself, or you can use it with a larger switcher, like one of the big 12G switches we have, and it fits in the same one rack unit shelf. You can put it in a one rack unit Teranex Mini rack shelf. So it's no bigger physically rack unit wise than the previous model, but I think it's a much better solution for streaming now because it's so much more flexible. You can use all these different software tools. You can see some of the workflows that we've got here. We've got a guy here doing a small tech show. He looks very tech actually. He's got tech hair. But he's doing a small tech show, and you can see he's got a nicer camera. He's doing it all on the web presenter, and that's a scenario that we made work. Here's one that's sort of inspired in some ways. My kids do a lot of these, or watching YouTube videos and learning how to draw. Here's a situation here where someone's doing a drawing show, and they can do it live, all on the Blackmagic web presenter. And then there's another scenario here where someone's doing a more presentation, and this is actually a scenario we tested out where you're using a camera and a computer for graphics, like, and it's basically a business presentation through Skype. So that's another scenario there. But obviously, it's such a flexible solution. I'm sure there's all kinds of software tools that we haven't even tried it with yet that work with webcams that'll just work with. Now that Blackmagic web presenter is available now, and it's $4.95. And if you want to get the Teranex Mini Smart Panel, that's an extra $85. It doesn't come with that. It comes by itself because not everybody needs that. But if you do want the preview and the audio meters, and you want to be able to use the switcher feature, then you just add that Smart Panel. So I think that'll be pretty exciting. So I think it's a wonderful combination here. I think we've got switching to stream, we've got switching to record. It's more modular. You can build the systems you want. And so I think that's really exciting. But what's great now is because we've built the talkback converter in, I think that's going to save a huge amount of money for people who want to actually use professional features like talkback. So what we've done is we felt like we had one big final step that needed to be doing, and that's our Blackmagic Studio cameras. The Blackmagic Studio cameras have been growing in popularity. When we first introduced them, we felt like people didn't really understand them. We did design these as being enabler cameras for people that were doing smaller productions to be able to get things like tele and talkback. But one of the problems we've had recently, and they've been growing in popularity and been doing really well, and it's been really exciting to see that and see people that would never had the chance to do talkback and tele in cameras before be able to adopt these things. And often a lot of TV studio customers adopted these cameras as well. So I think it's been very exciting to see sort of lower-end customers in some ways, and even online customers do this. The problem is we had with these cameras, and this is a problem we've popped up recently, these cameras have a big battery in them. And we actually are finding problems shipping them because, in fact, our customers are also having problems shipping them because that big, expensive battery is now becoming an issue with airlines don't allow products with large batteries in them. It's causing an issue due to safety. So, and also a lot of people didn't use the battery. I mean, these are cameras that are basically plugged into switches. There's no real problem with plugging in power. The battery just adds a lot of weight and cost. So we felt that it was time to release some new models that basically just remove the battery. So removing it saves a lot of cost. It eliminates problems when people ship the camera around. I mean, if you're building, you're sending out your live production kit via air freight, you don't have to worry about now declaring that there's batteries in these things. So there's newer, lower price models that essentially replace the old models, and they're much lower in price. So the Blackmagic Studio Camera 2, which is the newer model of the Blackmagic Studio camera, it's basically the same camera, HD camera, without the battery, and it's now $1,495 US. It was $1,695, so that's a $200 reduction in price, and that adds up when you're adding a bunch of cameras. And with the talkback obviously built in, you can plug those cameras straight into the switcher now and get all the talkback and tele features without an extra talkback converter you had to buy before. Now when it comes to the 4K camera, we've also done some, even though this is a HD switcher, we've also done some work on the 4K camera, and we've been able to make a whole bunch of improvements there. That camera is now $1,695. It was previously $2,495, so that's an $800 drop. And obviously we've done more than just the battery to reduce $800, but we've been really working hard on this, and we really hope that this makes some big savings for people and lets them use cameras with professional talkback, tele, and control features, because that gives you such a wonderful way of working. I mean, it ties everyone together and lets you do all kinds of really exciting workflows in a really professional way. So even the smallest productions can be truly professional. Now the other thing too is, remember, these cameras have built-in color correction and lens control, and all the ATEM switches can control the cameras, including this one. So if you plug the software in, you can actually get the full camera control page, which I'll bring up over here. Sorry to rush off on you guys, but you can see the camera control page over there. And so this switcher is running that, and you can also do camera adjustments. And the color correctors in the cameras are fantastic for giving you a sort of more creative look. So we think that these new cameras are a fantastic combination with the ATEM Television Studio HD. You can use its SDI outputs to talk to the cameras. Until now you've had to use that as a separate converter. Customers don't have to do that anymore, so I think it's pretty exciting. So hopefully these products go well, and that's pretty much all we have for this update. Thanks for joining us. I mean, we really enjoy building these new products for customers, and we love the fact that when customers buy them, we can really feel like we're putting back into, like people aren't, we're not being complacent. We really are working hard and we really are listening. When we talk at trade shows, we're really listening. So we can't wait to see what people do with these new products. I think there's going to be so many more features. It's going to allow kind of, again, all sorts of changes in the workflows, and we'll be ready with our engineers getting there to put some of the, you don't really know how the workflows change until people actually use the new products you do. So it'll be exciting to see how they change and make sure we get the, the software tweaks and things as people come up with new ideas and ways of working, which is always exciting. And again, we'd like to thank you guys in the media for supporting us, and we appreciate them, and the customers, of course, as well. We really appreciate that support. It's something that kind of lets us live our dreams, and hopefully we can also build products that let customers live their dreams. Customers that come up to us and say, thank us for building the original TV studio, because they say it's helped them grow a business, and I think that's wonderful. And sometimes we're just speechless when people say that. The fact that you get customers coming up and thanking you for something, I think that's a huge thing. So we're really excited to have worked on these new products. We hope that they're going to have sort of encapsulated everything everyone could have wanted for a newer version of the TV studio. But way beyond that, we hope that it's got everything everybody would ever want for a streaming solution, but way beyond that. So I think it's really exciting. So look, that's all we have for this update. So thanks for watching, and I guess we'll see you guys at the next trade show. All right, take care.